Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, we'll take a look at concerns over winter air quality in Maricopa County. Also tonight, we'll hear about John F. Kennedy's connections to Arizona, and we'll learn how the theory of disruptive innovation can apply to education. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Winter is approaching, and for the Phoenix area, that means air pollution issues. Valley residents are likely to again be faced with concerns over temperature inversions and bans on wood-burning fireplaces. Here to talk about regional winter air conditions is Eric Massey, Director of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality's Air Quality Division, and Bill Wiley, Director of the Maricopa County Air Quality Department. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
What are we doing? How are we doing? How's air quality in the valley heading into winter? How's it looking?
Well, as we head into winter, we are actually moving into one of the worst air pollution times of the season for us, largely because of the pollution that we're dealing with and the concentrations that we see, specifically what we would call PM 2.5, or what I would more commonly refer to as soot or smoke levels. And what we're seeing is really high concentrations of really harmful pollutant that can actually penetrate past your lungs and into your bloodstream, creating real problems for specifically sensitive people in general, but the overall population as a whole.
And I want to get a little bit deeper there as far as particulates and soot and these sorts of things. But I know the feds are watching us, and we got some concerns on those timelines. What has to be done to meet federal standards?
Well, we've got to stay below a federal standard. They pass health standards, and all states across the country have to meet those. And that's why we're here today, is because we're very, very close to exceeding those standards, which then would require us to put a plan in place and a bunch of new controls. So we're trying to have a voluntary effort to get people to restrict their activities.
Is there a timetable to, it basically once it reaches that level, that's the timetable for the plan?
Once we exceed the standard,
yes,
don't meet the standard, then EPA will make a decision saying you're not meeting the standard, and they'll give us 3 years to come up with a plan. But that requires rules, that will require all kinds of new controls, even on sources that aren't causing the problem.
Yeah, talk more about that. What kind of regulations would we likely be facing if that were to occur?
So the kinds of regulations that we'd be looking at is anything that generates these very fine particles from a source of combustion. So things like the trucking industry, diesel smoke could be at risk of having to do additional controls. Those particular industries that where burning is a real important function of the actual business itself could be facing additional controls, in addition to looking at what we can be doing about the residential aspects.
And staying below the threshold is key here. You mentioned residential aspects, you mentioned soot. What are particulates? We hear about particulates and the level there all the time. Mm-hmm. Define particulates.
So particulates, in the concept of what EPA regulates, is actually two different forms. One is what we call PM10, which we'll just call dust. It's commonly the crustal materials that you see out of the earth and blows around out of the desert and off of disturbed soils and other man-made types of activities. The other one that we deal with is called PM 2.5, which is really a soot. It's a product of combustion, so think of it really as smoke level. PM10 is about 7 times smaller than a human hair, and PM 2.5 is about 30 times smaller than a human hair.
And you mentioned residential concerns, wood-burning fireplaces. Doesn't seem like that would be that big of a deal. It's a big deal, isn't it?
It's a big deal, and it's a big deal in the winter, especially when we have inversion conditions. You know, you have a ceiling come down and the pollution can't escape the valley, and you have 300,000 fireplaces all emitting pollution at the same time with no place for it to go. And that's why we have these very, very high pollution levels during these winter periods.
And you mentioned the temperature inversions. That's yes, what we see that a lot. That's something you can see when you're on the freeway, or you look out there and go, yuck. Explain the temperature inversion again.
Temperature inversion is when it's warmer, the air above is warmer.
Yes.
So the smoke and the pollution rises, and then it stops, because it typically will not go past that warmer layer. And so it just sits there, and it builds up and it builds up, and it gets very unhealthy.
And very unhealthy. It looks bad. Is it as bad as it looks?
Usually it's worse than what it looks.
Wow.
I mean, those are some of the conditions that we run into. And I think that the point for us too is that visibly the worst days that we see and the worst days that we see on our monitors are some of our most significant holidays, like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, and New Year's Day.
Which explains why we see these alerts and we see these, these conditions at unacceptable levels on days, and everyone's going, well, I'm home. I'm not driving. Nothing's going on.
Right.
But if your fireplace is going, that's a factor.
That's right. That's right. And that's, it's interesting because you typically don't have the business activities going on those days we have the highest level. So we know it's from fireplaces.
So what's being done now? What's being done to address these issues to keep us under that threshold?
Okay.
Well, the first thing that we're doing right now as a department is we're putting out a region-wide forecast. And as part of our forecast, we're trying to tell people what's happening in the upcoming days, usually 3 to 5 days out. And the concept here is to give people the opportunity to, number one, decide what their behavior is going to be over that time period, either in terms of burning, being able to predict whether or not there will be a no-burn day. But the better aspect is really empowering people to make decisions on how they can also take measures to protect their own public health. So if you know a day is going to be bad in advance, perhaps you try to schedule your activities such that you're not out and about in that air quality during that particular day.
Anything else going on?
Well, we actually have some rules that are in place and a county ordinance in place on no-burn days. So when we call a no-burn day, which is based on the forecasts that come from ADEQ, I actually send inspectors out. And you can get a warning letter to a $250 fine for a homeowner. For businesses, it can start at $200 and go up substantially higher than that if you're caught burning on a no-burn day. So there are some rules in place. They'll go substantially higher if we go non-attainment.
Yeah.
And non-attainment means not meeting the standards and EPA requires a plan.
So yeah, basically you hit that threshold and all
Yeah.
bets are off, and you think you got it bad now.
Yeah.
Wait till that happens. Of course, you think you got it bad now. Some people do have it bad now as far as the health concerns are. Do we see added admissions in hospitals? Do we see hard facts and figures when we have these bad days?
We do, and that is one of the key selling points of our campaign. But anecdotally, I've spent time with my niece in a hospital on a smoke-filled night. I'm sure many other people have spent time with their loved ones in a hospital room waiting to see a respiratory therapist or work through those particular issues. So you see it both in the hard data as well as kind of the anecdotal evidence just about you.
Okay, no burn days. Anything else you want to emphasize to folks to keep these levels down?
The key thing is pay attention to the no-burn days. There are other things you can do on no-burn days. I mean, there are gas fireplaces, there are electric fireplaces. There's a great video that you can download and watch. You can put burn candles. You can have incense. I mean, there's a lot of other kinds of activities you can do. I think a key point here, we're only asking people to take action on the no-burn days. We don't issue those every day of the month. And in fact, what we found is that 2 or 3 days before the holiday, we typically don't have problems. So it seems to be a cultural event, not necessarily something for heat.
And again, you will issue these in advance, knowing how the weather patterns are changing and developing?
That's exactly right. We have meteorologists on forecast that are looking at how the weather's going to impact the concentrations. They're looking at what our monitoring network is telling us what pollution levels look like. And so we're doing our best to predict, and we actually have pretty good predictions about what's going to happen over the course of the next few days. And so we'll call those no-burn days, or health watches, or high pollution advisories are typically how those will get seen.
Well, let's hope the information gets out there. Let's hope that we can clean up the air a little bit here, certainly for a variety of reasons, not the least of which want to make sure your niece gets out there and has some fun. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
Get the inside scoop on what's happening at Arizona PBS. Become an 8 Insider. You'll receive weekly updates on the most anticipated upcoming programs and events. Get the 8 Insider delivered to your email inbox. Visit azpbs.org to sign up today.
Tomorrow marks the 50th anniversary of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. And with that in mind, we thought we'd look at JFK's connections to Arizona with Jack August, visiting scholar in legal history at the law firm of Snell and Wilmer. Jack, good to have you here on Arizona Horizon.
Great to be here.
Let's talk about what kind of a relationship did JFK have with Arizona?
Well, let's kind of approach it chronologically. It's kind of episodic. I think that might be the best way to put it. We know that he, in 1936, at the age of 19, Joseph Kennedy Sr. thought it might be good that his kids take a quote-unquote working vacation in Arizona, and he had a friend with a multi-thousand-acre ranch just west of Benson, Arizona. And so he and Joe Jr., John Kennedy and Joe Jr., went out there. Some say they went for 4 months. I think it was probably 2 months, and and they worked hard, I think, comparatively. But it's also mentioned that it was the first paying job the boys ever had.
Isn't that interesting?
That's interesting. And they visited some of the border towns, as kids will do at the time. Then later, jumping forward a little bit, in 1944, He comes to Arizona to recover after the PT-109 incident. His back is hurt. He goes to Castle Hot Springs. It's a little too slow up there. And so he wanted a little more action, and he came down to the Camelback Inn for a couple of days, and I think there's some famous photographs of him recovering at the pool there. And
I think he even stopped at the Biltmore, didn't he? I mean,
yes.
Maybe the Biltmore wasn't even fast enough for him.
It wasn't fast enough for him. So the Camelback Inn was a little maybe younger at the time.
Okay, so then we got to, and from then, of course, on, his political career develops. In Arizona, how popular was John F. Kennedy?
Well, I think, Arizona was still, in 1960, a Democratic state in terms of registration. But by 1960, the so-called Pinto Democrats, those Democrats, many of them had origins with Southern states' rights Democrats, more Southern than, say, progressive Democrats, were registering. They were still registered Democrat, but many of them were now, by 1960 and 1970, registering as Republicans. And so he was popular with the base, but ultimately Barry Goldwater campaigned hard here, of course, and his name recognition was high. And he did better than many people thought, but he lost Arizona to Richard Nixon, and indeed, well, he campaigned here on November 3rd, 1960, five days before the election, and he gave a speech. Some of it is on tape in, I think, the University of California, Santa Barbara archives, and it's a pretty amusing speech. He references Barry Goldwater and Nixon, and how the elephants were all tied together and following each other, and Nixon couldn't follow Eisenhower and all that. So it was a typical campaign stump speech. But he came here, but then did lose the election on November 8th.
But it was
Arizona.
It was relatively close, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
and
it was.
he was impressed by that to the point that he paid a little bit of attention to Arizona Democrats, didn't he?
Yes, he did, and in fact, it was one of the great takeaways for Arizona was he appointed Stuart Udall, a congressman whom he knew very well and liked, and who campaigned for him. He appointed him Secretary of the Interior, and he was the first Arizonan to hold a cabinet position in an administration.
And future Governor Raul Castro plays a part in this as well. Talk to us about this.
Yes, well, it's a little bit of inside political baseball within the Democratic Party. At the time, Carl Hayden, Senator Hayden was a senior senator, the guy that controlled the Appropriations Committee, the purse strings in the Senate, but was institutionally very powerful. He had a very ambitious administrative aide that old-timers will remember, a guy named Roy Elson, who was twice the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in '64 and '68. Well, in 1960 to '63, Roy wanted this young and up-and-coming and popular Hispanic Superior Court judge in Tucson named Raul H. Castro was making noises about maybe running for the Senate. And so Roy Elson and Senator Hayden had early discussions with President Kennedy to maybe appoint him to ambassador. Well, the assassination takes place, but nevertheless, that talking point continued when LBJ took over. And sure enough, before 1964 election, Raul Castro was ambassador to El Salvador, and Roy Elson has a free ride to the Democratic nomination. So that's kind of where.
Yeah.
But it started in the Kennedy administration.
Isn't
so
that
that's
interesting?
Another one.
And then it's interesting because you talk about the fact that he did not win Arizona, but it came close, and he
Okay.
did celebrate the fact that the Democrats helped him. He also courted the Latino vote, did he not?
Yes, he did, and his wife actually taped, as many historians know, President Kennedy was an early utilizer of this medium, of television, and he used it to great effectiveness in 1960, and I'm sure he had plans in 1964. But also he did Spanish language commercials, and his wife again did several of them. And I think many people that grew up, I'm a native from here, and growing up here, in many of the Hispanic households I would go to, there'd be a picture of Jesus and maybe the cross and a picture of John F. Kennedy, who was a Catholic. So his Catholicism helped with that base. It may have alienated others, but nevertheless, it probably just was a wash in the end.
And one, speaking of a wash, let's talk about the Central Arizona Project here, because while we're kind of looking at his relationship with Democrats and the state, he wasn't necessarily a friend of the CAP. Talk to us here.
Well, yes. Well, his term kind of bisects the longest Supreme Court case in American history, which is very important to Arizona. It's Arizona versus California. When he becomes president, the special master, a man named Simon Rifkin, it was such a complex and Byzantine case that they had to have a special master. The hearings and briefs and arguments were completed by 1960, 8 years after it started, and several people had died in the process. Kennedy appointed against Secretary Udall, but the Californians who were getting hearing noise that they were going to lose the case, and indeed in 1963 when it's handed down just after Kennedy was assassinated, Arizona versus California is rendered, and Arizona is in a good position to finally say, yes, it's feasible to dig the ditch and build a Central Arizona project. By 62, Kennedy is already looking at California to win California in its 37 electoral votes in 1964. And so it's almost pure politics. And so what they do is, well, California's going to lose the case. Let's give them something. And so the Interior Secretary and Congress began working on a massive regional water plan. And CAP was part of it. But Carl Hayden had been working so long, and he wanted that to be a priority. So the regional plan versus CAP go it alone. Paul Fannin joined Senator Hayden, and the editorials by Eugene Pulliam of the Arizona Republic, they just excoriated Stuart Udall and his brother Morris Udall every day almost. He wrote Hayden a letter, it's over in the Arizona ASU archives, that I'm going to take my daily horsewhipping in the press, but you know, we've got to hold this together. And ultimately, 5 years after 1963 to 68, that was a legislative struggle. The bill is passed. CAP is finally affirmed, and we finally have water here by the mid-1990s. It took a long time.
It did take a long time, and it's very important to the state's development. Before we go, though, the impact of the assassination on Arizona in particular, was it any different? Was it so removed?
I think I was here. I think I was in third grade, and I remember the teachers took us out at Madison Meadows, North Central Phoenix. They took us out on the playground and told all of us. It was then grade 1 through 8, and I've talked to many people. Another columnist that occasionally offers opinions, John Talton, and we talked about it the other day, that, you know, we all remember where we were in school and all that and what the teachers did. It was a very serious thing, and I think all of us remember it, even as a third grader. So I think the state was affected just like the rest of the country.
Well, Jack, we thank you so much for your memories. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want to hear from you. Submit your questions, comments, and concerns via email at arizonahorizon@asu.edu.
Replacing older, more complicated ideas with newer and more efficient strategies is one of the tenets of disruptive innovation theory. But how to apply disruptive innovation to education ideas? Joining us now is Michael Horn, co-founder and executive director of education at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. Horn was a keynote speaker at a conference held today by the Arizona Commission for Post-Secondary Education. It's good to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Did I get that right with disruptive innovation? Is that close to it at least?
That approximates it. It's interesting. Disruption, I think a lot of people think it's just the new fangled thing or the breakthrough idea. It's a little more specific than that. It's really an innovation that starts as something primitive. It's not as good as what's out there right now, but it brings forth affordability, simplicity, convenience, and allows people that didn't have access to a really expensive product or service to start using it. And then it gets better and better over time, and people flock to it because they want something more affordable.
So, and tailor this now to education concerns. How do we do that?
Sure thing. So we're starting to see in higher education in particular, a lot of models powered by online learning right now that are coming out and making education a lot more accessible and affordable for a whole group of students, really working adults, who did not have access to higher education before. Arizona has been a stalwart of this over the last couple of decades. And we're seeing the pace of innovation right now increase significantly to make the price point a lot more affordable, and really to start taking the innovations that you can do with technology to make it much more personalized for individual student needs. And that's the exciting part of the work.
So personalized, affordability, accessibility. What about quality?
Quality is going to be the big question. I would say over the last couple of decades, a lot of the online universities that have come out have been great business model innovations, and the quality has been sometimes really good and sometimes not so much. And a lot of what we're trying to do is raise the topic of you can actually use this to make education fundamentally student-centered, to meet each individual with his or her needs. And that requires a very different mindset about what education looks like from where it's been. Now, in K-12, I'll tell you, I actually think there's been far more learning innovations and far fewer business model innovations. So we're seeing the potential.
So how much, though, can a bricks and mortar school customize education tailored to individual needs?
So in K-12 education, I'll talk there first and then we can talk about higher ed, because I think it's two different stories.
Okay.
In K-12 education, we're seeing that the bulk of brick and mortar schools can start to use online learning to really create a blended learning experience that personalizes and is tailored to each individual needs. A great example in Arizona is Carpe Diem. It's a charter school out of Yuma, Arizona, that uses online curriculum to say, hey, you go at your path and pace, but there's teachers roving around the learning room floor that can dive in as you're struggling, can pull you out for a seminar with another group of students, can work on a project with you. And so it's much more personalized than a traditional classroom lecture-based experience would be. So they're not building all the tools, they're using it from various people in the private sector. But it's that blend that I think is really fascinating and creates those opportunities.
Hybrid notwithstanding, is there a concern that when you've got a student and a screen and a yes and a no and a this and a that, and there's no one else around, that socialization, just the ability to communicate, that those learning experiences are lost?
It should be a concern. I think what we're seeing from most full-time virtual or online programs, as well as the blended programs that really take off, is that they really think about this issue of screen time. How much time do you really want students in front of a screen? What's the right interaction with adults? What's the right interaction with other kids, quite frankly? And it's why I think the best programs right now are those that really thoughtfully blend those different experiences together. But I will tell you, you walk into some schools that have online learning, and it's like walking into the night of the living dead. Students just clicking away, click, 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 and it's not that robust interaction. But I'll also tell you, it doesn't work as well. So I think that's the mitigating force. Students don't like that experience.
Interesting. Okay, you mentioned K-12 and post-secondary were different. Talk about post-secondary.
Post-secondary, I think, is going to be a different thing. I think we're seeing these online universities come on that actually will fundamentally disrupt a lot of our traditional colleges and universities. It wouldn't surprise me in the next 10, 15 years if a quarter, quite frankly, of our traditional colleges and universities merged or even went out of business. I think that the economics, their traditional business model is working against a lot of these traditional institutions, and the online players just have enormous advantages as they get better and better.
Again, though, quality of education post-secondarily, is it going to be there? Because again, if these things could go out of business, that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, it's an open question, but what I'll tell you is this, that the current teaching and learning occurring in current universities is pretty terrible. Most faculty members are not schooled in how to create very good learning experiences. They tend to be consumed with research at the elite end. They're overwhelmed by budget problems at the lower end. My sense is actually this is a huge opportunity to empower teachers to much more effectively reach their students.
Okay, disruptive innovation, how much is it being used now, and from what you have seen so far, what kind of results?
So we're seeing a lot of online education occurring, and disruptively so. We're seeing Northern Arizona, for example, is doing some really interesting things, taking that, putting it into a competency-based learning environment. It's just starting, but the excitement around that potential for quality is really quite there, because they're doing something really smart, which is aligning it with employer and workforce needs, so that when students leave, that there's actually an opportunity for them to immediately engage in the workforce, and so that there's actually a return on this time that they've put in.
And real quickly, last question here. You mentioned workforce and you mentioned job training and such. A lot of folks see a university education, a post-secondary education, as a way to round yourself out, to learn about things, learn about yourself, as opposed to focusing on one thing to the detriment of everything else. How does this play into all that?
That's a good question. I think a couple things people have to realize. One is that the majority of our citizens today don't enjoy that ideal collegiate experience where they get to have the well-rounded grassy quads and sort of snake through different experiences. When they snake through different experiences, most students don't complete college, and it's actually a pretty disastrous impact on their debt and so forth. So the first thing we have to acknowledge is that's actually not the common experience today. The second thing I think is if we can make education fundamentally affordable throughout our lives, we can actually make higher education a lifelong learning thing where we continue to come back to it as it makes sense for our different passions and pathways.
All right, very good. Hey, it's good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Friday on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalist Roundtable. Child Protective Services discovered 6,000 uninvestigated cases, and Congressman Ron Barber officially announces that he is running for re-election. That's on the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.